corrupt campaign finance system. I'm the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and in that position I've had the privilege of meeting veterans who fought from World War II through Iraq and Afghanistan.
Thank you!
That's right, and we owe them a deep debt of gratitude. They fought to protect our way of life, which is called democracy. One person, one vote. When we have a situation today when a handful of billionaire families like the Koch brothers and a few others are prepared to spend some $900 million in this campaign cycle in order to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful, brothers and sisters, that is not democracy, that is oligarchy. And we are not going to allow that to take foot in this country. But it's not just a corrupt campaign finance system. We have right now all over this country cowardly Republican governors who are trying to suppress the vote. Now, this country from day one has struggled with a lot of pain and a lot of bloodshed to create a vibrant democracy where all people could participate and shape the future of this country. And now you got Republicans who are working overtime, trying to make it harder for poor people or people of color or old people to vote. And I say to those governors, if you are afraid of free, fair, and open elections, get out of politics, get a new job. What this campaign is about is the need to revitalize American democracy. I want this country to have one of the highest voter turnouts of any country on earth, not one of the lowest. And that is why we're going to overturn this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. And it's why we are going to go forward toward public funding of elections. We need an America where anybody, no matter what their political perspective is, can run for office without begging billionaires and millionaires for money. Now, one of the differences between Secretary Clinton and myself is a pretty important one. It's how we raise money for a campaign. It is very expensive, sadly so, to run for president. We're talking about many, many hundreds of millions of dollars. We had to make a choice 11 months ago when we began this campaign as to whether or not we would have a super PAC. And we thought about it for about 1/10 of 1%, 1 second. Wasn't much of a discussion, and we decided we don't want a super PAC. We don't want the money of billionaires and Wall Street and the drug companies. So with your help, we have done something unprecedented in American history. What we have done is received, since our campaign began, over 6 million individual campaign contributions. Anybody know the average contribution? 27. In Brooklyn, we're smart. That's right, $27. That's pretty good. And what that shows is that you can run a campaign, a winning campaign, without being dependent on big money interest, and that is exactly what we've got to do in this country. Now, Secretary Clinton has chosen to go another route in terms of how she raises her money. She has established a number of super PACs, and in the last filing period, her major super PAC reported raising $25 million from powerful special interests, including $15 million from Wall Street. Now, every candidate, Democratic or Republican, who receives millions of dollars from the wealthy and the powerful, they always say, hey, not going to impact me. But the question we have got to ask is, why do these entities make these large campaign contributions? They may be greedy, but they are not dumb. And then on top of that, as you know, Secretary Clinton has given a number of speeches on Wall Street behind closed doors for $250,000 a speech. Now that is a lot of money for a speech. And I imagine that if you're going to get $250,000 for one speech, just think about it, it must be one of the great speeches in world history. Probably contains the solution to many of our world problems. Probably written in Shakespearean prose. So I think if that speech is so great, Secretary Clinton should release the transcripts. Now, what the Secretary says is, well, she is prepared to release those transcripts if other people do the same. So here on Coney Island on this beautiful day, are you ready for a dramatic announcement? All right, hold your breath. This is a big deal. I am prepared to release all of the transcripts of all of the speeches that I gave on Wall Street. Now that is pretty easy because there were no speeches, there were no transcripts. Not for $250,000, not for $25,000, not for $2. No speeches, no transcripts. But I do have my cell phone on, and I am waiting for a call from Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan Chase. And I don't want any money from them, but I do want the opportunity to talk about their greed and their recklessness and their illegal behavior and what they have done to the working people of this country. Now, many of you know that as a result of that greed, this country was driven into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their homes, their jobs, and their life savings, and many of those people have not yet recovered. So I say to Wall Street that at a time when Goldman Sachs reached a settlement with the federal government for $5 billion, and that settlement meant, of course, that they acknowledged that they were producing packages, worthless packages of subprime mortgage loans. I say to Wall Street, when 3 out of the 4 largest banks today are bigger than when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail, we are going to break them up. And we are going to reestablish Glass-Steagall legislation. We need a financial system in this country whose job it is to make loans to small and medium-sized businesses, to consumers, to people who want to buy a home. The job of our financial system should not simply be to be an island unto itself, to make as much money as they can for themselves. Now, Secretary Clinton and I also disagree on a very, very important issue, and as all of you know, one of the main jobs of a president is foreign policy. And way back in 2002, I was in the House, Secretary Clinton was in the Senate, and we both heard what President Bush and Vice President Cheney and Don Rumsfeld and all these people had to say. What they had to say about the need to go into Iraq. I listened very closely to what they said. I didn't believe what they said. I not only voted against that war, I helped lead the opposition to that war. And let me tell you, if you go to my website, what you will see are the remarks that I made on the floor of the House. And it gives me no pride or joy to tell you, but much of what I feared would happen in terms of instability in the Middle East, in terms of the cost of that war, for the money that we spent and the human lives that we lost, turned out to be pretty much correct. Now, Secretary Clinton and Senator Clinton heard the same evidence. She voted for that war. The worst foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. Secretary Clinton, furthermore, as Secretary of State, worked with some other countries, but was very aggressive about it in overthrowing Gaddafi in Libya. Now, Gaddafi was a terrible, terrible guy. But what we have got to understand is that while it is easy to overthrow a dictator, it is a little bit harder to predict what happens the day after that dictator is gone. And we have got to think hard about the unintended consequences of regime change. And that is why I believe that in terms of the Middle East right now, obviously, we have got to crush and destroy ISIS, but we have got to learn the lesson of Iraq, and that is we cannot and should not do it alone. There needs to be a coalition. King Abdullah of Jordan, I think, made the right point. What's going on there now is a fight for the soul of Islam, and at the end of the day, that fight will be won by Muslim countries with their troops on the ground. We should be supportive from the air. We should be involved in training, but I will do everything I can to make sure that our men and women in the military do not get sucked into perpetual warfare in the Middle East. Now, Secretary Clinton and I have a different opinion regarding trade. Now, trade is not a sexy issue. The media doesn't talk about it very much. But it is an enormously important issue. 40, 50 years ago when I lived in Brooklyn, people with high school degrees or less were able to go out, work in a factory. It wasn't glamorous, but they made a living wage, a middle-class wage, and they were able to provide for their kids. All right? But what happened is that over the years, starting with NAFTA, corporate America said, why do I want to pay a worker in Brooklyn $20-25 an hour? Why do I have to protect the environment? Why do I have to do those things when I can shut down in the United States and then go abroad, pay people pennies an hour, and then bring those products back into the United States? These trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, were written by corporate America to shut down plants in this country and hire cheap labor abroad. And that is exactly what has happened. Truth is that since 2001, we have lost 60,000 factories in America. not all of it attributable to trade, but a lot of it attributable to trade, and millions of decent paying jobs. So I tell corporate America, those days when you can shut down here, move to China, move to Mexico, and bring your products back into this country, those days are over. You're going to start investing in the United States of America. And we will and are, that's right, leading the effort against this Trans-Pacific Partnership. And let me touch on another issue. Doesn't get much attention. And one of the points of this campaign is that we as Americans, we have got to determine what the issues are. It's not going to be CNN, CBS, or ABC. Because they will talk about everything except the most important issues facing the middle class of this country. And let me talk about one of those issues. Right now in Brooklyn, in New York, all over this country, we have senior citizens and disabled veterans trying to make it on $11,000 or $12,000 a year Social Security. Well, you know what? Nobody makes it on $11,000, $12,000 a year Social Security. What is happening in my state of Vermont, here in Brooklyn, all over this country, is seniors do not have the money they need to keep their homes warm. They don't have the money they need to buy the medicine they require. They don't have the money to buy the food they need. Now, the response to that crisis from the Republicans, if you can believe it, is they are going to cut Social Security. It is really quite unbelievable that anybody could cut benefits when people can't make it on $11,000, $12,000 a year. Well, I have got bad news for those Republicans. We are not going to cut Social Security. We're going to expand Social Security benefits. Now, I've introduced legislation which I believe is the best way to go forward to increase Social Security benefits and extend the life of Social Security, and that is lifting the cap on taxable income. Now, right now, you got a multimillionaire contributing the same amount into Social Security as somebody who makes $118,000 a year. If you got rid of that cap, you start at $250,000 on up. You can extend the life of Social Security, not the 19 years that currently exist, but for 58 years, and we can expand benefits by $1,300 a year for people living on less than $16,000. Now, a great nation is not judged by the number of millionaires and billionaires that it has. It is not judged by the size of its military or the number of nuclear weapons it has. A great nation is judged by how we treat the weakest and most vulnerable people amongst us. That's what a great nation is about. Now, I have challenged Secretary Clinton on numerous occasions. Will she join me in lifting the cap on taxable income so that we can extend and expand Social Security benefits? I have yet to get an answer from her. I hope we can get that answer today. There is an issue of growing concern, and that is the future of water, our water supply in the United States and, in fact, around the world. I was in Flint, Michigan a few months ago, and what I saw in that city was literally beyond comprehension. I talked to parents whose children have suffered cognitive damage because they have been drinking poisoned water with large amounts of lead in it. We've got a water crisis, and one way to help this planet is to end fracking. Now, when Secretary Clinton was Secretary of State, she actually pushed that technology around the world. What we have got to do is to make sure that in the future, people throughout this world have clean, fresh drinking water. We have got to phase out fracking. Now, this campaign is doing well because instead of spending our lives hustling money from billionaires and Wall Street, we are talking to the American people. And we are hearing what's on the mind of the American people. We talk to workers, and what workers around the country are telling me is they cannot make it on $8 or $9 or $10 an hour, that we have got to raise the minimum wage, which is a starvation minimum wage today at the federal level of $7.25 an hour, to a living wage, $15 an hour. And that's right. That's interesting. You know, one of the ways that change takes place, and I hope everybody understands it, change never takes place from the top on down. It always takes place from the bottom on up. And when we talk about the minimum wage, the whole struggle for a $15 minimum wage is so inspiring and gives me such confidence for the future. If we were here, right here, 5 years ago, and somebody said, you know, Bernie, the $7.25 minimum wage is a starvation wage, it's awful, we've got to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. The person next to him or her would have said, you are nuts. You are thinking too big. You want to more than double the minimum wage? You can't do that. That's crazy. Maybe $9 an hour, maybe if we're lucky, $10 an hour. But you know what happened, and you do know what happened. People in the fast food industry, with the support of the trade union movement, they went out on strike. And they said to their neighbors, and they said to the country, we can't make it on $7.25 an hour. And they rallied the American people, and millions of people began to agree with them. And then a few years ago, in Seattle, $15 an hour. In LA, San Francisco, $15 an hour. In Oregon, $15 an hour. California. And with millions of people standing up and fighting back in New York, $15 an hour. Congratulations to all of you. And when we talk about wages in America, it is not acceptable to me that women continue to earn 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And I know that every man here will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. Women want that whole damn dollar, and they're entitled to it. And when we talk about listening to the American people, we are listening to young people all across this country. And one of the wonderful things about this campaign is that when we began it, you know, many of the pundits were saying, well, young people, you know, they're not really interested in politics. They're not really interested in voting or in shaping the future of their country. They're too busy on their video games or doing what they do. Well, young people have surely shown those pundits to be absolutely wrong. The young people of this country have made it very clear that they are the future of America, and they damn well want to help shape that future. And one of the areas that they are very legitimately concerned about is that many of them are leaving college deeply in debt. And we're talking about 30,000, 50,000, even higher, 100,000, all right? What this campaign is about, the essence of this campaign, is to think outside of the box, not accept the status quo. And when we look at education, everybody here understands that if this country is going to be successful in the future, in a highly competitive global economy, we need the best educated workforce in the world. It is absolutely insane, and it really is, that millions of people today are struggling with outrageous levels of debt because they chose to do the right thing and get an education. That is crazy stuff. And that is why when we look at public education today, you know, when I was growing up here, high school degree, you did pretty well, go out and get a job. That world has changed. And in many respects, a college degree now is the equivalent of what a high school degree was 50 years ago. And that is why when we talk about public education today, it is not good enough to be talking about first grade through 12th grade. We need free tuition at public colleges and universities. Now, some people may think this is a radical idea. It is not a radical idea. It is a commonsensical idea. It will happen sooner or later. Our job is to make it happen sooner. Right now, as many of you know, Germany has free college education. Scandinavia has free college education. You know, I was at a meeting in Washington a year ago, and I was talking about Scandinavia and higher education, that it was free, and a guy jumps up and he says, "Hi, my name is whatever," and can't quite remember. He says, "I am from Finland," and you are wrong, Senator. I said, "Really?" He said, "No, it is not free in Finland. They pay us to go to school." So I stood corrected. But it is not just the need to make public colleges and universities tuition free. I want you all to appreciate what that means. I grew up in Flatbush, and we lived in a 3.5 room rent-controlled apartment. My father came to this country at the age of 17 without any money, and he never made a whole lot of money. And neither my mother or my father ever went to college. And right now, all over this country, here in Brooklyn, all over America, you got millions of kids who don't know anybody who has a college degree. And the idea of them getting a college degree is about as realistic as them going to the moon. It is not within their world perspective. And what I want to see in this country is I want to see every boy and girl in the 4th grade and in the 6th grade who studies hard, takes school seriously. I want those children to know that regardless of the income of their families, yes, they will be able to get a college degree. And we also, thank you. We also have to deal with this student debt crisis. And that is why I believe that people with student debt should be able to refinance that debt at the lowest interest rates they find. Now, this campaign is doing our best to listen to people who often do not have a voice in this country. We are listening to our brothers and sisters in the Latino community. There are 11 million undocumented people in this country. Many of them are being exploited because they have no legal rights. They're not being paid the minimum wage. They have no protections on the job. Many of them are living in fear and in the shadows. I believe the time is long overdue for this country to pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. And if Congress does not do its job, I will use the executive powers of the presidency to do my best. This campaign is listening to our brothers and sisters in the African American community. And what they are telling me, and they are absolutely right, is how does it happen that in our country we have trillions of dollars to spend on a war in Iraq that we never should have gotten into, that you have people in Congress who have given billions and tens of billions in tax breaks for the top 1%. How does it happen that we can spend money in those ways, but yet all over America, our inner cities are crumbling? Our job as a nation is to get our priorities right. I don't want people living in dilapidated housing. We're going to build affordable housing. I don't want children going to schools where the buildings are crumbling and they're getting an inadequate education. I don't want to see kids in the African American community having unemployment or underemployment rates that are off the charts. So what we are going to do is something very radical. We're going to invest in our young people in terms of jobs and education, not jails and incarceration. This country today, shamefully, has more people in jail than any other country on earth. That is not acceptable. And we are going to deal with local police department reform. We are going to deal and change and reform the so-called war on drugs. Millions of Americans over the last 30 years have received police records for possession of marijuana. In fact, today, marijuana is listed under the Federal Controlled Substance Act as a Schedule I drug at the highest level, right alongside of heroin. That is crazy. And to my mind, what we have got to do, and I've introduced legislation to do that, take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. Should not be a federal crime. States have the right to legalize or not, but it should not be a federal crime. And by the way, when we talk about drugs, let us be honest and acknowledge that in this country today, we have a dangerous epidemic of opiate addiction and heroin addiction, and every single day, people are dying from overdoses. In my view, if we are going to be successful in dealing with this crisis, it's a very serious issue in my state and all over this country. If we're going to be successful, the way to deal with drug addiction and substance abuse is understanding that it is a health issue, not a criminal issue. This campaign is listening to people in the Native American community. The debt that we owe to Native Americans for what they have given our culture is unpayable. And yet anyone who knows about American history knows that from day one, when the first settlers came to this country, Native American people were lied to, cheated, and treaties that they signed were abrogated. And today, on reservations and in communities all over this country, you got high rates of poverty, high rates of drug addiction. You have young people killing themselves, suicide rates, really incredibly painful to observe. If elected president, we will change our relationship to the Native American community. And one of the lessons, a very profound lesson that the Native American people have taught us, is that all of us as human beings are part of nature. And we will not survive as a people in the years to come if we continue to go about destroying nature. Which takes me to an issue of global consequence, and that is, as a member of the Senate Committee on the Environment, I have spoken to scientists all over our country and all over the world. Do not believe anybody who tells you that climate change is not real, is not caused by human behavior, is not already doing devastating damage to this country and the world. And what the scientists are telling us very clearly is if we do not get our act together, the problems that we have today will magnify many, many times in the years to come. And what they say, if we do not act boldly in transforming our energy system, there will be more drought. There will be more flooding. There will be more extreme weather disturbances. There will be acidification of the ocean. We are right now destroying oceans all over this world. There'll be rising sea levels. There will be more international conflict because people will fight over limited natural resources. We have a moral responsibility to leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable to our children and future generations. And whether the fossil fuel industry likes it or not, their short-term profits are not more important than the future of our planet. And we will transform our energy system to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. We can do that. We must do that. When people begin to think outside of the box, and when they look around them and they say, you know what? The status quo is not working. One of the areas they notice right away is that we as a nation are the only people in the industrialized world, the only wealthy nation that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. UK does it, France does it, Germany does it, Italy does it, Holland does it, Scandinavia does it. I live 50 miles away from Canada, and they do it as well. Now, I'm a member of the committee that helped write the Affordable Care Act. It has done a lot of good things. It has done away with this obscenity called pre-existing conditions. We've added some 17 million people to the ranks of the insured. But despite the gains of the ACA, today in America, shamefully, 29 million people have no health insurance. Many of you are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. Am I right? And then every day, we are getting ripped off unconscionably by the drug companies who are charging us the highest prices in the world for the medicine that they need. Now, when it turns out that despite so many of our people uninsured and underinsured, despite the fact we're paying so much for medicine, we end up as a nation spending far, far more per capita on health care as do any other nation. In fact, we spend almost 3 times more than the British, 50% more than the French, far more than the Canadians. In my view, and let me be very clear about this, because I have been criticized for saying it, so let me say it again. Health care is a right of all people, not a privilege. And that is why together we are going to fight for a Medicare for all single-payer program. Now, all of you know that the only way to make real change is when we stand together, when we do not allow demagogues like Trump or anybody else to try to divide us up. And if you think back on American history, you think 100 plus years ago, workers in this country sometimes worked 7 days a week, worked incredible hours. They could be fired arbitrarily. They had no say at all on the job. And what they did with incredible bravery, they stood together to form unions and negotiate contracts. You think back on the civil rights movement, and what we know is that, again, hundreds of years ago, we don't even know the names of the people who were killed, the people who were beaten, the people who were jailed. But the African American community and their allies stood up and they said, we will end segregation, we'll end racism, we're going to end bigotry in America. No one person did it. It was done by millions of people standing together, redefining what this country should be about in terms of civil rights. People forget that 100 years ago, no time at all, from an historical perspective, women in America did not have the right to vote, did not have the right to get the education they wanted or do the work they wanted 100 years ago. But women and their male allies stood up, fought back. Some of these women went to jail. They went on hunger strike. Some of them died in the struggle. But they said, and their male allies said, that in this country, women will not be second-class citizens. And when we think about how change comes about, if we were here 10 years ago, no time at all, from an historical perspective, 10 years ago and somebody jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, I think that in the year 2015, gay marriage will be legal in 50 states in this country. Nobody would have believed that person. But what happened is the gay community and their straight allies stood up, fought back against bigotry, fought back against hatred, and they succeeded. Gay marriage is now legal. Now, I know that there is concern that Donald Trump might become president of the United States. It ain't gonna happen. Last CNN poll that I saw had us 20 points ahead of Trump. But it's not just polls. The American people will not elect a candidate who every day insults Latinos and Mexicans, who insults Muslims and Islam, who insults women, who insults African Americans. And I want you all to remember this, because some people have forgotten. Before Trump was a candidate, he was a leader in the so-called birther movement. That was an attack on the legitimacy of the first African American president we have ever had. That was a racist attack, no ifs, buts, or maybes. Now you can agree with Obama, you can disagree with Obama, that's called democracy. But don't try to undermine his legitimacy as President of the United States. Now, Trump will not become president because the American people know that what is great about our country is the diversity that we have. They know that it is our strength when black and white and Latino and Asian American and Native American, when people come together, and that coming together always trumps the dividing us up. The American people know that what makes us a great nation is our willingness to help and support each other. When your family is in trouble, I've got to be there for you. When my family is in trouble, you've got to be there for us. And the American people know that supporting each other always trumps selfishness. And maybe most importantly, the American people fully understand what every major religion on earth has taught us. And that is that at the end of the day, love always trumps hatred. Now, on April 19th, I think as all of you know, there is going to be a very, very important Democratic primary here in New York State. Now, in this primary, we are taking on all of the establishment. But what I have learned throughout this campaign is when there is a high voter turnout, and we've seen high voter turnouts recently in Wisconsin and many other states, when that happens, we win. When the voter turnout is low, we lose. So I hope that on April 19th, we will have the largest voter turnout in the history of Democratic primaries. I hope very much that here in New York State, you're going to help lead this country toward the political revolution which we need. Thank you all very much.